Hello, today I'm going to take you through gender and achievement because this could come up as an essay, and if you are following along with my revision plan, this week's one is to look at gender as well as ethnicity. So, gender and achievement, what are the trends? Well, up until the 80s, boys were generally outperforming girls. It's only been since the 80s that we've seen an increase in achievement from girls. So you need to know inside factors as well as outside factors. Let's look at the inside factors. Let's start with equal opportunity policies. So if we look at the policies that have been introduced into schools, things like the national curriculum, GIST and WISE are really vital in understanding why suddenly girls' improvements have been made. So if we look at the national curriculum, it standardised the learning and the teaching that was taking place in schools. So traditionally, girls would have been channeled into quite feminine subjects, but now they had to take certain subjects because it was standardised. Subjects like English, maths, science. So that gave them opportunity to do subjects that they probably wouldn't have and thrive in those subjects. It also, with the national curriculum, made schools monitor success far more, because with the national curriculum, as we'll see shortly, it brought a lot of other marketisation policies whereby schools began to compete heavily with each other. And so one of the outcomes of this was more teachers were monitoring underachievement, and girls obviously benefited there. GIST and WISE are great examples of policies which really encourage girls into those STEM subjects. So GIST is girls into science and technology, WISE is women in science and engineering, nearly forgot. So those are the key policies that broke those kind of subject choice stereotypes down. And so girls were seeing that perhaps they could have a career in those areas and working hard for that. If you want a key name to talk about this, obviously with paragraphs, it's always good to get a sociologist's name in. Bowler is a great one. He looked at how these policies changed a lot of the barriers, removed a lot of the barriers for girls. On to our second inside factor, positive role models in schools. So in schools, increasingly since the 80s, we start to see many more women, particularly in the senior levels, head teachers, as well as senior leadership teams like heads of year and heads of school. And so by providing positive role models, of course, girls are going to look up to those role models and perhaps envisage that perhaps that could be them one day, pushing them to be more motivated to stay on longer in education. Number 2, stereotypes have been removed. Another key change since the 80s is a review of the curriculum, is a review of textbooks, is a review of all of the teaching resources. And Wiener argues that this allowed any stereotyping to be removed out of textbooks and resources. Again, to try and break the assumption that girls should be channeled into certain roles. Okay, on to labelling. So labelling is a massive inside factor because it looks closely at how boys and girls interact in the classroom with the teacher very differently. So there are lots of studies here, but French is a great one because French looked at classroom interactions and found that boys often, although got more attention, it was often negative attention. They were often tended to be more disruptive, and by getting negative attention to by the teacher, it often led to even more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, GCSE and coursework. So along with the national curriculum, a part of the 80s was this push for marketisation of education, and one of the policies that we saw in the Education Reform Act was this introduction of GCSEs so they could compare different schools, and along with that brought courses where you had to do coursework. Now, lots of studies like Garrard have said that girls tend to be better at coursework, and this is because they are more organised and use their time effectively. So time management, all of those skills that are suited to doing well in coursework, so you get your first draft in, your second draft in, is more suited to girls, and boys didn't do so well on that. So that might explain some of the increase in achievement. The last inside factor is league tables and selection. So really talking about those marketisation policies that made schools compete, well, it encourages schools to be very selective over who they take into their schools. So if your results from SATs, from GCSEs, from A levels are going to be published on league tables, you're going to be very careful as to who you allow in. Now, of course, schools can't be overtly selective, but what it does do is kind of make schools favour girls. So those are your inside factors. Let's move on now to the outside factors. What is happening outside of school that may be putting girls at an advantage? One of the most influential movements was the feminist movement. And so feminism since the 80s has really encouraged girls to review their careers, review their ambitions, rethink a lot of their life choices. So the feminist movement was key in making a lot of legal reforms. So the Equal Pay Act, Sex Discrimination Act, and of course this allowed employment to completely change for girls. It was an incentive to go into the world of work because they knew they wouldn't be discriminated. McRobbie is a great study to look up for that one. Family, there's been lots of changes in the family since the 80s. You've had a lot of changes in trends. Marriage has gone down. First time marriage has gone down. Birth rate has gone down because of things like contraception, allowing girls to really control when they have their first child. The Divorce Reform Act has led to changes in increase in divorce. So what we have are girls that are putting careers first, but also seeing lots of role models with single parents who are financially independent. You've also got to consider that in the family, primary socialisation is very different for boys and for girls. So there is this bedroom culture whereby girls are encouraged far more to stay home, to stay in their rooms, to read, and whereas boys are more encouraged to go out, be active, and of course one is going to benefit school far more. You are more likely to do your homework if you're staying in and that you're in your bedroom with your desk and your books, etc. Employment opportunities. Mitsos and Brown draw our attention to the fact that there has been a massive kind of feminized career opportunity trend. So with the impact of feminism, with Equal Pay Act, Sex Discrimination Act, and all of those equal opportunity policies, what we do find is employment is opening up for females. And so what you could introduce here is this idea of the glass ceiling effect. Has been broken or is being attempted to be broken. So we start to see women in higher up positions, and of course they are going to then act as role models for younger girls. And the last outside factor is perceptions and ambitions have changed. So it all links, but Sue Sharp is a very famous study to include here. She interviewed girls in the 80s, then returned in the 90s and found that actually ambitions and perceptions really had changed. So not only do we see all of these changes, but we've actually got empirical evidence to suggest that when girls are picking what they prioritize in life, it had a massive change in between the 80s and the 90s. So girls in the first instance were prioritizing things like marriage, love, children, family, whereas when she returned in the 90s, girls were prioritizing careers, prioritising employment and education. So a massive shift in social attitudes there. So that is a very quick breakdown of inside factors and outside factors. Make sure, of course, you take the opportunity to get examples of these and evaluation points if you are planning an essay. I hope that's been helpful.